Hi, this is Mark Graban. This is a practice session for a talk I'm giving at the KaiNexus user conference. Title of the talk is When Being Right is the Wrong Strategy for Change, Leadership Lessons from Psychology. And you can find a link to the slides and other resources about the things I'll talk about here at the link on the slide, markgraban.com/KaiNexus2018. So in the past, I've talked and written about the need to shift from being a cop to being a coach. In the context of lean or just management in general, I think the old approach is thinking of, being a cop, catching people not following standardized work, people getting in trouble for not hitting performance goals. I think the idea of a coach, I think it's become pretty well accepted. We've got events like the Lean Coaching Summit. There's a lot of talk about coaching in the lean community. And so we see what I call, huggy guy here. And, we could ask and discuss, is coaching, is it just a matter of attitude? Is it a matter of smiling and being friendly? Or is there more to it than that? There's a lot of people who I like to use the word coach instead of being a consultant. We have agile coaches. We have lean software coaches. That term is being used a lot. But there was a really good article recently in Harvard Business Review. It's kind of a accusatory headline. Most managers don't know how to coach people, but they can learn. And I think studies show if you ask people if they think they're a good coach, they will say yes. It's fairly common for people to overestimate their ability in different ways, and I think that the same would be true with coaching. But over time, I've come to see it as a need to shift from being cop to coach to, I think, better yet, is being a counselor. Because if coaching means, as this HBR article said, most people, when they say they're coaching, they're really telling people what to do. And I think that proves not to be very effective. When we're telling people what to do, we may at best get compliance. So do we want compliance or do we want change? Which is more effective in the long term for our organization? I would argue, as would others, that it's better to have intrinsic motivation where people are choosing to adopt new ways of doing things instead of just falling in line and doing what we tell them to do. So I think there's been a broad realization that just telling people what to do isn't enough. Within the lean methodology, we talk a lot about using the word why, asking why when we're problem solving and trying to look for a root cause. Explaining why is something that people have really talked about a lot in recent years. So we can shift from telling people what to do, but I think it's only marginally better to tell people why to do something. That might feel really progressive and evolved to say, you need to do this, but at least I'm telling you why. You need to wear your seatbelt because it's safer. And gosh, it's 2018. I hope there's not too much controversy about wearing seatbelts, but we'll come back to other examples here later. But there's a lot of, I think, fairly established science that comes from psychology and counseling that shows it's better, it's more effective to ask people why they would want to do something. So not just, again, the progression here is to shift from telling people what to do. A little bit better is telling them why. Better yet is asking for their why. So when people complain about the things other people aren't doing, we might hear questions like, why aren't more leaders embracing lean management? Well, it sounds like that's, and I've been guilty of this. We're blaming the leaders. Why aren't employees speaking up with ideas? It sounds like we're blaming the employees. Ethan Burris, who's talking here at the user conference, has done a lot of great research about why employees don't use their voice. And there's great lessons there about not blaming the employees. Some of you might ask, why are employees not using KaiNexus? We hear that blame talk. Now, we could try to explain why they should, but that's not necessarily going to be more effective. Here's a favorite question of mine. Why aren't people using control charts? And here's a picture. We have great functionality in KaiNexus for using control charts to learn to not overreact to every up and down in the metric. This is a control chart that I've created and used within our own KaiNexus instance of KaiNexus software. This is the number of registrations for our webinars over time. And you can see for the most part, it just fluctuates around an average. Now, we had one outlier webinar back in late 2017. That's funny. The follow-up webinar with that same person that was promoted pretty much the same ways had a much lower attendance. So we don't really know exactly why it was an outlier. But anyway, why aren't people using control charts? Is it because they're dumb? Well, no. I mean, why aren't managers embracing lean management? It's not because they're dumb. Is it because they don't care? Well, no. I mean, I think they care about the organization. They just have a different view of what it takes to be successful. And at some point, and I've struggled with this, believe me, we have to respect other people's choices. I love this quote from John Perry Barlow, who passed away earlier this year. Never assume the motives of others are, to them, less noble than yours. So you might look at the things that we think they're not doing, that they should be. So, well, they're not embracing lean management. Well, their choice to ignore lean management or to not embrace lean management, to them, may seem just as noble as our desire for them to embrace lean management. This is where human psychology is complicated, but I think we can understand it. There are natural reactions, natural tendencies that we would have as change agents, if you will. And the people that we're trying to influence are also going to have natural human tendencies. It took me a while for me to learn this in my career, but I think this is very true. Being right, being correct, doesn't mean others will go along. And that can be really hard to stomach. Say, well, I've got the right approach. Those other people should see it as the right approach. They should do what I'm suggesting because I'm logically and rationally correct. But people are much more complicated than that. The late Peter Schultes said, and this is a quote I've used a lot, people don't resist change, they resist being changed. When we tell people to do something, there's almost an equal and opposite reaction to say, no, I don't. I don't need to do that. Why should I do that? Oh, you're telling me why? No, I don't agree. This is human nature. So we can step back and ask, well, if pushing change doesn't work, should we try a new approach? If people resist being changed, maybe we can step back and ask if we say people are being resistant, is it more accurate to say people are being resistant to my idea? Another question that I've had posed to me in the last couple of years, it's really made me reflect. Do we want to be right? Do we want to be correct? Or do we want to help others change? And I've thought about that a lot and reflected on that in what I've written in the first couple of chapters of the book, Practicing Lean. As I'm blogging, as I'm writing articles, it's easy to write articles that say, those other people are wrong. But doing so may push those people further away from the change we'd like to see. And so a lot of these lessons come from, of all places, counseling. Now, I am not a licensed therapist. I am not a licensed social worker. I've read a couple of books. But this has been really eye-opening to me to think about how we try to help others change as engineers, as consultants, as lean facilitators. So there are lessons that come from the realm of what might be called traditional counseling, therapy, addiction treatment. Traditional counseling, as people in recent decades have come to realize, traditional counseling was based upon an expert, meaning the counselor, telling somebody they need to change. For the most part, that doesn't work. But yet counselors would keep doing that. You need to stop smoking. You need to stop gambling. You need to eat healthier. So it might not even be in a therapist's office. It might be in a primary care setting. And this traditional counseling approach of telling somebody what to do doesn't affect positive change. So again, do you want to be right? The doctor saying you need to eat healthier, that doctor is right. Telling somebody they need to eat healthier is probably not imparting any new information that the patient doesn't already have. On some level, they know they should eat healthier. I'll tell you about something I've struggled with. I go to the dentist, and I can't tell you how many times the dentist or the hygienist or somebody says a statement, you need to floss more. You should floss every day. I know I should floss every day. Them telling me, reminding me, reinforcing I need to floss every day is not imparting any new information into my brain. I know I should floss every night, but for some reason, I don't make that happen. I mean, I floss a lot after I'm at the dentist, but then that habit kind of breaks down. So on the page, the follow-up for my talk with resources, references, and everything, there are a couple of videos from two different dental practices. One's a video kind of illustrating the telling approach, the traditional approach of counseling somebody to change and how that makes people react. So whether you're a dentist or a lean consultant or a manager, another thing I think is just very true is the idea we can't make somebody else change. Change is a choice. Think about yourself. If I told you to change, if I told you you're sitting down right now, I tell you, you need to stand up. I don't think you're automatically going to do that. You're going to sit there and your first reaction is, why is Mark telling me to stand up? That's nonsense. I'm sitting, I'm comfortable. I don't understand why I should stand up. I'm not going to. So even something that simple is a choice. Sitting down is a choice. That doesn't mean you're being resistant to standing. And I think these are important things to understand as change agents. So a few years ago, I was really, I would say lucky, fortunate to be at the annual Lean Startup Conference where I met a social worker who was starting a business. And we were at a social networking event and we were talking and she asked what I do. And I talked about Lean and Kaizen and trying to change people and organizations. And she said, oh, I think you would be interested. Now, I think maybe she was telling. I think she was actually setting up a situation where it was my choice. But I try to think back to the exact words she used. You might be interested in something called motivational interviewing. And I decided I was, because I want to be a more effective change agent, a more effective influencer. So I've read some of the books that I'm going to share with you here today about this approach to counseling, addiction treatment, that instead of telling people what to do, is based upon asking questions and talking about the person's motivation for change. And recognizing that change is not like flipping a light switch. Change is a process, a mental process that we all go through in evaluating if it's better to change than it is to maintain the status quo. So I think, and you can see a video online, the motivational interviewing approach in a dental practice would include a question like, what are some reasons for flossing every day? If the hygienist asked me that, I might say, well, I won't get as much stuff trapped between my teeth, and I won't build up as much plaque, and my teeth and gums will be healthier, and I might not need as much painful dental work in the future. And so by asking that question about motivation, the brilliant thing about this is that I'm talking myself into changing. Articulating these reasons out loud is a great predictor of whether or not I will change. I think this is really, really powerful. So, what is motivational interviewing? Pictured here is the core textbook by Miller and Rolnick. I've never read a psychology or therapy textbook. This is actually a very readable book for a non-clinician. I've got another book I'll recommend to you as leaders. But Miller and Rolnick, who really define this methodology, would say in part, motivational interviewing is a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication. It's often referred to as a conversation about change. A style of communication with particular attention to the language of change. So when you think about the balance of what motivational interviewing calls change talk and sustain talk. So why do people choose not to change? And we have to respect this as a choice. They're not being resistant to change. They're choosing to maintain the status quo. When what's called sustain talk outweighs change talk, people tend to stay in the status quo. Motivational interviewing is, as they say again, designed to strengthen personal motivation for and commitment to a specific goal. So it's not as much about what to do, but defining the why and the when, and laying that foundation for people to then decide, I am going to change my behavior. And you can learn more about motivational interviewing also at the URL that you see on screen there. So motivational interviewing, like a lot of things like lean, perhaps, is not just a set of tactics. There's a mindset, or what motivational and interviewing people would call the spirit of MI. And for those of you who are really deeply involved in lean, I'm curious if you'll see the parallels here. Or maybe there's something different. First off, the idea of collaboration between the practitioner and the client. So we could say consultant and client, change agent and manager, manager and employee. There's meant to be the spirit of collaboration. Secondly, evoking the client's ideas about change. We'll talk more about evoking. The idea of emphasizing the autonomy of the client. So to me, from the lean Toyota framework, this makes me think of the idea of respect for people. That if you choose not to change, I need to respect your human autonomy to make that decision. I might not like it, but it's not up to me. Change is up to the individual. Organizations are made up of a number of individuals. And then the fourth idea is that we should be practicing compassion in the process, which I think could be related to respect. So motivational interviewing makes this progress by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. So as coaches, therapists, consultants, we want to listen for this change talk from the person we are having this conversation with about change. So it starts with what's called preparatory language. They're not quite ready, but they're talking themselves into it. So it starts with desire to change, ability, talking about I can do this, reasons to do it, needs to do it. So then, as a practitioner of motivational interviewing, our goal is to continue the conversation and help that person move toward mobilization language, commitment. I'm going to change, activating, I'm ready to change, and then taking steps. And there's an acronym here. It makes it easier, or a mnemonic, darn cat. We want to listen for change talk and encourage more change talk, and not inadvertently trigger more sustain talk. So there are some skills. There's the mindset, the spirit of MI. There are some skills, a different mnemonic, ORs, open-ended questions. So we hear a lot about this in the lean coaching community, Socratic leadership, that we should maybe do nothing but ask open-ended questions. So this is a really important aspect of motivational interviewing. But there are other things that we can do as a coach. We can give affirmations, give people credit, give them a pat on the back for what they're trying to do. Reflective listening, which is a form of active listening, but sort of not just repeating back what we're hearing, but making suppositions. So if somebody says, I'm really struggling to make time to read this lean book that we've all been told to read, a reflection might say, well, this is important to you. You know, that feeling bad about not reading, you can sort of turn that into a positive and make that supposition that, well, this is important to you. And the other person might say, well, yes. And then you can explore why it's important. And they might talk themselves into spending more time reading that book that was assigned to them. And then we have summaries, which is a little bit more complex version of reflections. But somebody might say, but you know, those people are just being resistant. They're not doing their Gemba walks. They're not filling out Kaizen forms in KaiNexus. But another lesson from motivational and interviewing about resistance, and the book I would really recommend is the first book to read, is called Motivational Interviewing for Leadership. There's a podcast. I'll add that to, I think it's on the webpage about my talk here, a podcast with the authors talking about applying this in the workplace. So motivational interviewing views resistance not as a bad thing. As they say in the book here, resistance is a term that seems to treat a normal part of the change process as abnormal or pathological, without recognizing how we as leaders may be contributing to the issue. So again, we shouldn't blame people for being resistant. The stages of change are pretty predictable. Pre-contemplation, where somebody's not even aware of the need or the opportunity. Contemplation, where they're thinking about it. These are the stages we might think of as resistance. And then preparation, action, and then maintenance, or we might use the word sustainment in the practice of lean. So instead of complaining about resistance, maybe we can strike that word from our vocabulary. Motivational interviewing teaches us maybe a more accurate, more constructive, better word we could use instead, ambivalence. And this word ambivalence, the one phrase that gets used a lot is that somebody wants to change, but they don't. They should, but they have reasons not to. They want to stop the addictive behavior, but continuing to do it feels good. So that person is, as we say, on both sides of the fence. Ron Oslin, a former Toyota leader who does a lot of teaching and coaching, I've taken a day-long class with him about motivational interviewing, says leaders are often addicted to the status quo. And we think, well, what does the word addicted mean? One definition of the word addiction means something that we know is bad, something that we know has negative consequences, but we do it anyway because people are complicated. Leaders know they should stop blowing up and yelling at people, but when they're under pressure, yelling and screaming at people maybe feels good. So they're sort of addicted to it, or they can rationalize why, well, maybe they should change that behavior, but they don't have to. And so, if you want to think more about why this matters for lean, I'll refer you to a webinar that Ron did last year for the Lean Enterprise Institute. A really good introduction to motivational interviewing. And Ron to me is a real expert I look up to on this. So we can talk about others being ambivalent, but I think we can learn lessons by looking in the mirror. I'll talk about some of my own ambivalence. I should change, but I don't. So we have change talk. So I might say something like, I need to stop playing with my phone when I'm in meetings or when I'm on site with a client. It's rude. I'm not paying attention. It looks bad. Doesn't help build relationships. There's lots of reasons to change. But in that moment in a meeting, I may find myself thinking sustained talk. Well, I'm not needed in this meeting anyway. It's okay to look at my email. So I'm being ambivalent. And the more I can articulate change talk and actually say it out loud, not just think it, that's a great predictor of actually changing. When I think about my book, Measures of Success, as important as this book was to me, I had ambivalence. There was different stages of change talk. Well, I need to write this book. I'm going to write it. I want to finish it. But it was easy to let things get in the way. Sustained talk. Well, I'm busy. There might be some element of fear. What if people don't like the book? What if it doesn't make a difference? Reasons that would prevent me from moving forward. Now, I was fortunate to have a book coach, and she wasn't practicing motivational interviewing on me per se, but I think there are just good parallels in this type of thinking. So one of her recommendations to her authors that she coaches is to come up with a daily commitment, a pledge, an affirmation. And this might sound corny as all get out, but this is a document I made, and I printed it out and I had it in my office, and I didn't say it out loud every single day, but I did this a lot, especially when I felt a lack of motivation. Talking through these bullet points, saying this out loud, talking about my motivations, the actions I'm going to take, the priorities, actually found this to be quite helpful. Now, so how can we help others get past ambivalence? Well, we need to try to move beyond another aspect of human nature as coaches, as change agents, something called the writing reflex, as in the reflex to try to write others, to tell them what to do. So me standing here and telling you to stop telling people what to do is probably not a great example of motivational interviewing. I should ask you, why is it important to you to stop telling people what to do, or something along those lines. So we want to try to avoid the writing reflex. As motivational interviewing says, it's the desire, it's well-intended, to fix what seems wrong, to set them promptly on a better course, relying on directing instead of evoking. So I think we'd say it's human nature to tell. It's well-intended, but it doesn't work. It's well-intended. Don't beat yourself up for it. It's human nature, but it doesn't work. So maybe we should reflect on that and think about our motivations for changing that behavior that might help others change their behavior. So when we think about the instinct to tell, last year at the Lean Coaching Summit, there was a really impressive group from an organization in Oakland called the Beyond Emancipation, working with kids who have aged out of the foster care system. One of the women on the panel said, I spent 8 years telling foster kids what to do, and it was exhausting. Because I'm not a parent, I don't have any kids, but I can only imagine. When you tell kids what to do, you get that equal and opposite reaction in response. So what does work? Evoking their motivation for change and guiding the conversation in a way that increases change talk and reduces sustained talk. So motivational interviewing calls this evoking. And I think an example of this, even though, again, they weren't talking specifically about motivational interviewing, but I think it was the same thought process, that the people at Beyond Emancipation learned over time, we believe that the person closest to the problem is closest to the solution. This sounds to me like lean. It sounds like Kaizen. Ask people not just what they should do, but ask them why they should improve. I've found this to be a very powerful tactic in working with others. And this doesn't mean manipulating them to go down the path you want them to go down. That would be the motivational interviewing people say that would be an unethical use of these methods. Drawing out someone's motivation is the goal, not manipulating them to do what you want them to do. So last year or earlier this year, I was working with a healthcare client, a manager in a nursing unit who was not doing her daily huddles because there were always reasons to not do them. And we were having a conversation about this. And she said just these two words to me were a red flag that really made me think about these motivational interviewing tactics. She said, "I'm stuck." So this to me sounds like ambivalence. So in this conversation, there could be change talk. I need to do those huddles every day. There's also sustained talk, things like, but it's really hard to make time. So if I start asking questions about why is it hard to make time? Why don't you have time? That's going to trigger more sustained talk. When instead we want to be asking questions or reflecting or moving the conversation along in ways that spurs more change talk, using this darn cat framework. Desire, I want to do daily huddles. Ability, I could start doing daily huddles every day. A reason, well, if I do that, we'll improve more. A need statement, well, I've got to engage my people more. Commitment, I'm going to do daily huddles. Then there's the next step further, activating. I'm ready to start them Monday. And then taking steps. I've started doing these huddles. So we want to, in the course of helping others, move the conversation along to trigger more change talk. And the thing that motivational interviewing has proven in so many different settings is that change is more likely to occur when the verbalized, articulated, out loud change talk outweighs the sustained talk. This triggers parts of our brain that are connected to taking action. So when someone is stuck, we can ask questions like this. And I asked this manager a variation of this question. I asked her, well, tell me 3 reasons why it's important for you to do daily huddles. And that got her talking about change talk. The other question we can ask is on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being most important, how important to you is it right now for you to change? So when you think about this 0 to 10 scale, how important is it for you to do these daily huddles every day? And she might say, well, it's a 6, kind of mid-range importance. The follow-up question here is the key. Well, why do you say 6 instead of 0? Or you could say, well, tell me, why do you say 6 instead of 3? But the key is you ask them to compare their number to a lower number. Because asking it this way triggers change talk. If you ask, well, why didn't you say 10? You're going to get a laundry list of barriers, if not excuses. You're going to be triggering sustained talk, and that doesn't help somebody change. So we can ask, how important is it for you on a scale of 0 to 10? And continue that conversation about change. The follow-up question, on a scale of 0 to 10, how confident are you that you can make this change? And she might say, well, I think I'm only a 3. Well, why do you say 3 instead of 1? That question, again, is much more likely to trigger change talk. Reasons why I can do it instead of reasons why I can't. So within motivational interviewing, we have the mindset, we have the different ORS tactics, and there are also 4 MI processes that we can think of as a process, somewhat sequential. First off, we engage people and focus on relationships, building trust, building rapport, helping the person we're helping understand that we have their best interests at heart. And then focusing the change, narrowing down the scope of the problem we're trying to solve, which maybe reminds you of Toyota problem-solving practices. And then evoking the reasons why, building commitment, and then talking about planning. So it's really important to build relationships. We want to make sure that we're not assuming somebody wants to be coached. Being coached is a choice. If you're told to go coach somebody, you're telling them, hi, I'm going to coach you. You're going to get that equal and opposite reaction pushback. I don't want to be coached. I don't need to be coached. So when we think about these four processes, engaging, we're basically asking, shall we walk together? And focusing, well, where should we walk? Where do you want to walk? Evoking, why are we doing that? And then when the time is right, planning. Well, okay, how are we going to do that? How are you going to do that? And when? But we have to realize this is not just a strictly linear process. There are going to be times when we loop back. If we push too quickly into the planning phase, we may need to go back and talk more about motivations in the evoking phase. We may really need to go back to step one and re-engage and rebuild the relationship. But we think of this as a process and a flow. And I think one of the key things one of the other things that reminds me of lean thinking here, it's the planning, the what to do and how is the fourth step. This reminds me of the lean thinking, A3 problem solving idea that we should stop jumping to solutions. And the idea that relationships matter. It's not just what to do, but how do we go about affecting change? I think this is something people learned yesterday in the change management workshop that I did. A lot of times we put our energy and emphasis on thinking about what to do and less about how to go about affecting change. So again, to think about these four steps. Engaging. Motivational interviewing textbook says it's the process of establishing a mutually trusting and respectful helping relationship. To me, reminds me of the Toyota production system and respect for people. Then focusing, an ongoing process of seeking and maintaining direction, finding a clear direction and goal, which reminds me of some of the ways I've seen Toyota problem solving visualized, that we start with a big, vague concern, and through discussion and we narrow that down to something more focused. So if somebody were to come into a counselor and say, my life is completely out of control, you probably need to, for one, build relationships and engage the person, and then focus that discussion around what the person you're helping thinks the top priorities are, the most important problems, what to work on first. So when we think about evoking reasons for change, not just what do you think we should do, that's really at the planning stage. Why would you want to make this change? What are the three best reasons to do it? That's the question I asked the manager about her daily huddles. How might you go about it in order to succeed? So if there's agreement with the person we're helping, then we can talk about planning. And again, we should think about resisting the righting reflex. Well, I know what to do. I'm going to tell you what to do. But experience and science has shown through motivational interviewing that people who articulate their own plan are more likely to succeed. So we can guide them. We can use conversation, again, without manipulating people. Because if you're just going to manipulate them, you might as well tell them what to do. And it probably won't work either way. So to wrap up here, and when we think about being right, doesn't mean others will go along. I've had to learn this lesson the hard way, shifting from being more of an engineer who thought, my job was to come up with the right answers as opposed to being an effective coach, an effective change agent. So I've really challenged myself again through my blogging, through my speaking, through working with others. Do we want to be right, or do we want to help others change? I hope in standing up here and talking about motivational interviewing, I haven't turned you off to it because I'm telling. That's something I can reflect about after the talk. Because I think we can try to reframe resistance. When we see resistance to change, they're not doing what they're supposed to. They're not doing what I want them or need them to do. Instead of blaming them and labeling them a bad person for being resistant, we can remind ourselves that resistance or ambivalence is, again, a natural phase in the change process. So we can help somebody talk themselves through ambivalence to change. Let's start conversations about change. Let's practice. Maybe we can practice motivational interviewing. Let's learn a little bit. Let's try these tactics and see if it helps us do a better job of affecting change. So in that spirit, I'm still trying to practice motivational interviewing. So I'll just pose a question here. You don't have to answer it or volunteer right now. Are you stuck? Are you personally stuck in a state of ambivalence? Do you see both sides where you want to change, but maybe you don't? Are you on both sides of the fence? Well, if so, I'd be willing to try to help guide that conversation about change and your motivation. If you'd like to schedule time with me, you can do so through my website. Let's chat over the next couple of days. We can start engaging in building that relationship if I don't already know you. And I hope that's helpful. That'll help me get better at this process of helping others embrace change. So with that, I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. Again, if you go to this URL, you can find the slides, you can find more information, videos about different dentists, links to books and podcasts about motivational interviewing. All I can do is invite you to learn more about this. I hope you might choose to do that. So with that, thank you. Thank you very much.